What's up, Periscope? How's everybody doing tonight? We are in the room live for Bible Basics. We are back at it with our fourth module. I'm glad to see you guys trickling on in here. Of course, as you join in the room, make sure you swiping to the right and sharing it to all your followers on Periscope and everybody who follows you on Twitter, on Facebook, on any of your social medias. Make sure you share this message. We want everybody to get on with us tonight in Bible Basics. We're going to have a good time on here. Glad to see you guys trickling in. As you come in, make sure you let me know where you're watching from. If you're a member of New Psalmist or from another church, definitely let me know that. I'm putting my do not disturb on because stuff was popping up on my phone. Alrighty, yeah. So yes, I know we've been on our mini break. We had a early summer break, then we came back for another semester, then we came back in. All right, we got somebody watching from Planet Fitness from Williamsburg. What's up, Steve? Glad to see you on this. Steve Lawrence from Potter's House, Denver, the world-renowned musician, leader of praise and worship, all things music. He's just amazing. Glad he's on with us tonight. I got to get out there to Denver, check y'all out. Wade's getting ready to do some stuff, and Armando and his crew at New Psalmist. Watching the airport in Denver. Alrighty, glad to have you on with us tonight. You know, we're going to have a good time picking back up. You know, the fall is in full swing. Everybody is getting back up. Hey, Stacia, glad to have you on down watching from Florida. Watching with us. I heard you got a new assignment down there. You know, it's these smart people always got something new going on. I've been watching from Pittsburgh. Go Ravens. Okay, good. I was about to say. Yes, go Ravens. All righty. Cockeysville. Hey, Mr. Doug. Glad you're on with us tonight. I'm so simulcast. So I think we may do the simulcast later on. But, you know, I like Periscope exclusive right now. Eventually, we may jump in, you know, get all the rest of the stuff on here. But right now, we exclusive with just Periscope. Next week, we may open it up a little bit. But we just, you know, got it going. So glad to see you guys jumping on in here with us. I'm excited. Tonight we are going through the book of Isaiah. We have gone through all the books leading up to the book of Isaiah, and now we're picking up with the prophets, looking at the prophet Isaiah. We got some interesting stuff. I think for many of you who may not have done any Bible study before, this is going to be probably one of the most enlightening sessions we've done since we've started this Bible Basics class over a year ago now. Well, just about a year ago. We started last year, I believe it was on October the 12th. It was that second Wednesday in October last year that we kicked off on Bible Basics. And it's hard to believe that we have come this far so far. And I'm excited about where we're going. Glad you guys have been rolling, rocking out with us over these 12 months. Oh, yes, nice shirt. You know, I got to support the MPBC swag. It's something. I'll say this now. I can't start the lesson until we get at least 105 people in the room. So we need 105 people in the room before I start the lesson. So make sure you share, text your friends, yell out the window, tell everybody in your block, get on Periscope right now for Bible study. But while we're waiting on everybody else to get in the room, I want to share with you guys a couple things. So at New Psalmist, we have launched a new line of our, what we call a New Psalmist swag. And we are partnering with Under Armour. You know, Under Armour is the biggest corporation in Baltimore, and we have been blessed to partner with them. They've helped us to do some things with our schools to provide our students at our Take in Charge schools with Under Armour gear that rewards them when they do well. The students who achieve well above and beyond, we have been able to give them Under Armour gear because of our partnership with Under Armour. They have donated that to the schools because they're excited and they're vested in Baltimore, and they want to make sure that the young students in Baltimore are able to get ahead. So they have been partnering with us, and we've also been doing some things with workforce development. We've had some interns that actually were interning at Under Armour this summer. We had 8 interns, and of those 8 interns, 7 of them received full-time jobs, which is a huge blessing. So we've been doing some great things with Under Armour. And one of the other things we did, we partnered with Under Armour. Hey, say Stacy, glad you're in here with us, the media event page. So yeah, I'll share that with you in just a little bit. So we partnered with Under Armour, and we released our New Psalmist swag line. And we started off really simple. We have polo shirts that say New Psalmist Baptist Church on them. You know, you got to get this. It's available in the bookstore today. And we also have a line of T-shirts that say disciple on them. We didn't want to put a whole bunch of stuff on it. You know, you're walking down the street, you look like 3 books out of the Bible because there's so many words on your shirt, but it just says disciple right across the chest. So when people ask you about it, that gives you an opportunity to witness to them, share more about them. So if you like the New Psalmist swag, I want you to send up some hearts on the screen. If you like the swag, just send up some hearts on the screen. I want to make sure we weren't off base with the swag. You know, we had to make sure we were connected and doing stuff right. Okay, so I know you guys like it. So I encourage you, if you're in Baltimore, to go by Kingdom Church's bookstore at New Psalmist on any of the days the church is open in the evening, or on Sunday morning during normal hours while we're in worship. Come by the bookstore. You can get your New Psalmist polos. You can get your disciple t-shirts so that you can wear it around town, represent proudly. Not sure the exact prices, but you can call the church, call the bookstore. They'll give you all the pricing. And I encourage you to go by, pick up your stuff so that you're one of the first people with them, because we didn't do a big order this time. So the stuff's not going to be there for long. So you don't want to have to see everybody else wearing the shirts that you wish you had. But you got to get your stuff early, get it soon, so that you can be a part of the New Psalmist swag team. And of course, it's Under Armour gear, so you know it's good stuff. So I think let me look. Okay, we got 153 in, so we can go ahead and start the lesson. So I'm sharing this one last time on my pages so that everybody knows we are in Bible Basics. I want everybody to get the notification that we are going. So, you know, we got to share this out there so that they come to come to Periscope rather, and join in with us, because we're going to have a good time here tonight. So let me give you, of course, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, this is your first time in Bible Basics class. You've never seen this Periscope before. Let me give you a little introduction. I am Reverend Joshua Thomas from the New Psalmist Baptist Church right here in Baltimore, Maryland, where Bishop Walter Scott Thomas Sr. is the pastor. I am the leader of the Millennial Ministry and our Bible Basics. Hey, Shell, we're glad that you're in with us right now watching from Sinai. We are going to keep you prayed up, but we are glad you are in with us today in Bible Basics. So I'm the leader of the Millennial Ministry, and about a little over a year ago, in some of our meetings with our millennial ministry leaders and some of the millennials at the church, we started talking about what it was that we could do so that millennials could begin to grow and have basically an introduction, Christian education, really get that foundation. And welcome from Joppa. Glad you're in with us, Val. Glad and get that foundation. And what we realized was that we needed to do a Bible study that wasn't topical, where you looked at a specific book of the Bible, really dug into nuances in one specific book, but rather we needed to do an overview of the Bible, because a lot of times we take for granted, those of us who are in the quote unquote church bubble, we take for granted that everybody understands the composition, understands the books of the Bible, kind of has a general knowledge of the story, the narrative that we find from Genesis to Revelation. So what we did, watching from Mondawmin, alrighty now. So what we did, we decided to start off with this Periscope Bible study called Bible Basics that is going to travel through the entire Bible. We have been going since last October. It's a long journey, but we are going to make sure that everybody who goes through this course has an introduction, a foundation upon which we can then build upon later. But after we launched it, one of the things we saw was that this wasn't just something that millennials needed, but this was something that everybody needed. Even people who might not be in the quote-unquote millennial age of 18 to 33 were interested and really gravitated to the Bible Basics. So if I have anybody, I'm not going to make you a comment, anybody who's over 33 in Bible study night, just tap the screen, send up the hearts. I want to see if my honorary millennials showed up this week. Okay. So I called them our honorary millennials in our Bible Basics class. But we realized that there was such a need for a Bible study that really just looked at the Bible from Genesis to Revelation and walked through so that people could understand, have a refresher. Yeah, my brother, he's a couple years, he's not that far over. He's not that far out of millennial age group, and depending on what study, you may be considered a millennial. So you are honorary millennial today too. So we've been going through and we've had a great response. People have really been blessed. If you have missed any lessons, you can go to YouTube. Just go to youtube.com/JA Thomas1988. Or you can just search Joshua Thomas Bible Basics, and you will see all of the Bible Basics classes up to this point. That's just go to YouTube, search Joshua Thomas, and you will Bible Basics, and you'll see all of the Bible Basics classes up to this point. So you can watch them at your own time, begin to build your own foundation. If you want to get refreshed on anything, you can go right back and do that, and you have a good understanding of the Bible and where we are now. So today we are going to start off traveling through the group of books known as the prophets. Sometimes you may hear it broken down to major prophets and minor prophets, but for our study, we're going to look at all of the prophets together. It's about 17 books that we're going to look at all in one module. So this is our 4th module. So to give you a refresher, we've been off for a couple weeks, so I'm not going to quiz anybody today, but I'll give you a refresher. The Bible is broken down into sections. We understand it through sections. So the Old Testament, New Testament. We have 2 testaments, Old and New. The 66 books in the entire Bible, 39 in the Old, 27 in the New. The Old Testament is broken down into the following subcategories. We have the books of law, which are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Then we have the books of history, which is Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. And for our understanding, we grouped Esther with that as well. Then we have the books of wisdom, where we looked at Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon. We looked at all of those as the books of wisdom. Now we are at the books of the prophets, beginning with Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, which is the delineation normally for the major prophets, and then the 12 minor prophets that follow. So the books of law, the books of history were written in narrative form that give us history, almost like a history class, where you're sitting and seeing events after events, people after people, and so forth and so on, that were leading us on a timeline from creation to covenant to Egypt, captivity in Egypt, to the Exodus, going back to the promised land, then the light time in the promised land, then to exile, then back into the promised land. And that's where the historical narrative of the Old Testament concludes. Then we have the books of wisdom and poetry, which give us an insight into culture at different times during the different periods that we read about throughout the books of the law and the books of history. Now we are at the books of the prophets, and this is where we take another shift. So wisdom, the books of law, the books of history, a narrative. Books of wisdom and poetry provide culture, give us stories, give us sayings of the time. Now we have the books of the prophets. And the prophets now, hey, watch your Sister Carolyn from First Baptist Church of Steelton. Alrighty. That's the church where my brother, Reverend Walter Thomas Jr., is the pastor, Steelton, Pennsylvania, right outside of Harrisburg. Glad you're in with us. I tell my brother, one of his members was joining us today. Amen. So now we are in the books of the prophets, and the prophets share, they spoke in prophetic language during time periods that we read about throughout the books of the history. But now we are seeing it from the prophet's perspective. Before we saw the narrative where there was some mention of prophets. We heard different times, depending on what was going on, different kings may have gone to a prophet. But now, as we go, hey, it's Stephanie from another member from First Baptist Steelton. Glad you're in with us. So now we are transitioning to see it from the other side. So we're seeing things now from the prophet's perspective. What is the prophet saying, seeing interactions from their point of view? And the first book we arrive at is the book of Isaiah. Isaiah. So let's look at the book of Isaiah and kind of give a little introduction to Isaiah. We'll walk all the way through it. We're going to do it in the next 30 minutes. We're going through the entire book of Isaiah in 30 minutes. So this is going to be a world record. Somebody call up Guinness, because in 30 minutes we're going to be done. So let's hit the ground running. But before we do that, millennials, don't forget next Friday, the 14th of October, M2 worship at New Psalmist, 7:30 p.m. Some of you have been asking for when we coming together in the flesh. person, person to person, face to face. We're coming together next Friday, 7:30 p.m. at New Psalmist, dealing with our ministry theme, in but not of. And next week, we're going to start a series that is really going to transform our lives, challenge us to think out of the box, saying that we can get out of some stuff that our greed, that our desire to have more has led us into. But God is showing us how we can get out of it. And the time is now, because we don't want to become captivity in a world that we left because we wanted to yield to our own desires. But God has a calling on our life, and it's time for us to come out of that world and link up and align ourselves with the promises God has for us. Don't forget, tomorrow night, communion at New Psalmist. Now, Isaiah in 30 minutes. It's commonly believed, the book of Isaiah is commonly believed to be written by one source, that is Isaiah, that is identified in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1, Isaiah the son of Amos. That is the traditional understanding, that the book of Isaiah was written by this one person. The works of the book span over 200 years, starting in the 700 BC to 500s BC. So there's a 200-year span. So because there's a 200-year span, many of you probably can deduce what's next. Most likely it was not written and compiled by one person. Unless someone lived for over 230 years, that one person did not compile this entire book. Most scholars believe that there are 3 different sections, 3 different shifts within the book of Isaiah that we're going to talk about. And one thing of particular interest, well, let's look at that first. There are 3 shifts known as 1st Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah, and 3rd Isaiah. I'll say that again. 1st Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah, and 3rd Isaiah. Remember, this is Bible study. We digging into it. So I want to make sure that you guys are clear. The conservative understanding has always been that this is one author. We'll talk about that a little bit more, and how some of the rationales for that wrote this entire book. But the book of Isaiah, though it's one book in our Bible, is believed and commonly by most scholars is generally accepted in the religious community, in the academic community of biblical scholars, that there are 3 shifts, 3 movements, 3 different distinct authors, and 3 distinct voices, that as we travel on, you'll kind of see the different themes and the shifts as we go. So first, let's look at 1st Isaiah, which is known as Isaiah to Jerusalem. Isaiah to Jerusalem. Isaiah is a prophet to Jerusalem that comes to rise in the 8th century, 700s. And around the same time as the Assyrians are gaining power, around the same time as the Assyrians begin their attack and assault on both Israel and Judah, which is where Jerusalem is. Remember, it's two different states, northern kingdom, southern kingdom. The Assyrians are going to attack both the northern and southern kingdom, and in 722 they overtake the northern kingdom. So Isaiah is coming around, rising to prominence, rising in his prophetic voice during this time where there's much turmoil in the land. There's a lot of uncertainty about conquest, if they will be able to withstand the attacks that are coming against them. So that is the voice upon which he's coming to rise in. The call story of Isaiah is one that's very familiar to many of us. It's found in Isaiah, in the 6th chapter of Isaiah. I'm going to pull it up because I want to read a portion of that for you so you can kind of understand some of the things that are going on and the world that Isaiah is coming to rise in. So it starts off very familiar passage, Isaiah chapter 6. It says, "In the year the king Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphs, each 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe is me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the the seraph flew at me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my lips and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt has been taken away and your sin atoned for." Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am. See, send me." So that's the call of Isaiah. Very, very triumphant call, very exuberant, understanding, the call narratives that we see. We'll see another when we get to Jeremiah next week. And then we're seeing how Isaiah is coming to prophetic voice. He understands his sinful nature. He sees that he is not holy or not worthy. Chapter 6, and I started reading at verse 1. He sees that he's not holy, that he's not worthy to be in God's presence. Because remember, he is in the story, he's in the presence of God. He's not atoned, he's unclean. And being unclean, he's not permitted by law, Levitical law, to be in this holy of holies. Remember things we studied back in the beginning. He is not permitted by law because he's unclean. He's not a Levite. He's not of the priestly class to be in the holy of holies. So, but in the Holy of Holies, God purifies him. His sins are atoned for, and he is now eligible to be God's mouthpiece, to be a prophet of God. So, when we go on a little bit, down in verse 9, after he says, "Here I am, send me," God says to him, "Go and tell the people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous. Make their ears dull and close their ears." What that is giving us a glimpse to is that Isaiah is going to be prophetic in sharing the message, being the mouthpiece of God. But the people whom he's going to be sharing this message to are not always going to be receptive, or not really at all going to be receptive to it. So that builds the foundation for what we see in 1st Isaiah, which is chapters 1 through 39. 1st Isaiah, Isaiah to Jerusalem, chapters 1 through 39. So we see here some influence to kind of give you a context. Through some of the writings of Isaiah, there's some keys and some influence that we see to some of the prophets that were also speaking around the same time in the northern kingdom. Most notably, the prophet Amos and the prophet Hosea. We see through some of his language and how he talks about justice in this 1st Isaiah, as well as some of the analogies that he uses with referring to the unrighteous ones and as a harlot, as we see in Hosea. So we see some of those same themes, which gives thought to believe that there may have been, Isaiah was influenced some way, shape, or form by some of the prophetic traditions and the prophetic works and words that were being shared in the northern kingdom around this same time and a little bit preceding him. So that's one key we see, and some linkage to see some connection there. He's facing this nation. He's the prophet who now has to speak truth to power in such a difficult time where there's such political uncertainty because they're not sure if they're going to last. They're not sure if they're going to make it. Remember, as we study through the books of history, we see that there had been no dynasty, no king on the throne who had completely turned to God and was fully embracing and following the commands that God laid out. So even though Isaiah is the prophet of God, these kings are not necessarily looking to solely hear from God, which is a critical distinction that really helps because we can frame it from both ends. We've seen it from the books of history and with a historical narrative. This king did evil in the sight of God. But now we're seeing it from the prophetic viewpoint where the prophet is sharing. We see the legitimacy of the prophet having this call narrative where they've been purified, where God now is speaking through them to be his mouthpiece here on earth. But the words that the prophet is sharing are not always followed. So that's critical that we see in 1st Isaiah, especially as we look at Isaiah as he's dealing with King Ahaz, when he's worried about how they're going to handle the Babylonians that are coming, the Assyrians rather, that are coming in, if they'll be able to stand up to it. And Ahaz is trying to do things one way, and Isaiah is giving him God's word but he's not necessarily following that. And because of it, he makes some bad decisions, some bad compromises that put him in difficult positions. So we see that all throughout the books, the first Isaiah. So that is, once again, chapters 1 through chapter 39. The bulk of the book of Isaiah, the biggest section is first Isaiah, which is Isaiah to Jerusalem. Remember that that's Isaiah to Jerusalem. So this is pre-exile. This is pre-exile. So first Isaiah. Well, another theme I want to touch on that we see throughout first Isaiah is that Isaiah has a affinity and a true belief and desire to see the dynasty that comes through the line of King David restored and on the throne. So that is another constant theme you'll see throughout the first Isaiah, and that we've seen that was built up, and even through the books of history, we saw that theme constantly saying, turn back as my servant David. David had a heart after God. So we see that theme, and Isaiah's on that same wavelength, talking about the importance and the significance of the dynasty in the line of King David and how that dynasty must continue, but they of course have to follow the command of God. So that's first Isaiah. First Isaiah ends off in chapter 39. Then in chapter 40, we pick up with what is traditionally seen by most scholars and accepted now as second Isaiah. This is Isaiah to the exile, also known as Deutero-Isaiah, which is just second Isaiah, another way. So you may hear Deutero-Isaiah, first Isaiah, Isaiah to Jerusalem, Isaiah to the exile. So now this one picks up around 200 years or so later. Remember, the Babylonians overthrew Jerusalem in 587, and exile began in 587. So now we are in the middle of the 500s BC, where second Isaiah picks up. But now we have a different shift in authorship, in composition, and really of the makeup that give us second Isaiah. I want to read for you the beginning portion of second Isaiah. So we talked about the destruction that we find in first Isaiah. He's bringing these prophetic messages, but we see the path that we're not going to where we should be. Even Hezekiah does. Isaiah prays for him. He atones, and Hezekiah is healed, which is Ahaz's son. But then Hezekiah welcomes in Babylonians to see the riches and the things that are stored up in Jerusalem. And Isaiah tells him, well, because you shouldn't have done that, and these are the same people that are going to overtake you. That's how we end first Isaiah, talking about the destruction that shall come. So we see that. Now, second Isaiah begins with Isaiah chapter 40, and it starts off, comfort, comfort my people, says your Lord. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. We see a different tone now. Chapter 39, which is the end of first Isaiah, we have destructions coming. Now chapter 40, we have a whole new tone. And this is where we believe we have the next author of the second Isaiah, which is, we don't know, there's no information given us. We have the prescript in the beginning in chapter 1, verse 1, where we see this is Isaiah, son of Amos. So we get that there. But now in 40, we don't have an understanding. So many scholars believe that this is a Jew who has come in exile, who is writing to the other refugees who are in exile, but it's also written in some of the most inspiring language that we find in the Old Testament, really in the Bible as a whole. Some of the texts that you know of from Isaiah come from this passage. One that everybody knows, Isaiah 40:31. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. Though that language, talking in with such a glorious hope, that things will be all right because of a connection with God the Father and what God Almighty, Yahweh rather. I don't want to confuse you with Trinitarian language. Yahweh, connection with Yahweh will provide all needs that will strengthen and encourage and build you up no matter what season you're in. Yahweh will restore you and atone for you. So that language is coming from 2nd Isaiah. So scholars believe that this is someone who was very, very well learned, because of such the language that's used, and even taking it back to the original translations, they're seeing that how it's used and structured is clearly someone who has studied and someone who is learned. So that's one critical thing. Another thing I want to pick up on, one of the opposing theories looking at the 3-section model with Isaiah is that it's all written by Isaiah to Jerusalem, and that the works of 2nd Isaiah and later 3rd Isaiah are shared in prophetic visions. So Isaiah lived in the 700s and up to this point, but everything that's written after the destruction of Jerusalem is all given him by prophetic vision, and he's writing that in a prophetic tense of what is to come. That is what many conservative religious scholars and conservatives in religious practice will look at Isaiah and say it's all one. But looking at the construction of 2nd Isaiah and 3rd Isaiah, it's because of the past tense that's used, talking about the destruction as already having happened, not talking about it to happen in the future, but referring to it as already happened, referring to being in exile as we're here, but we're going back, the wait as we are waiting, but we're being renewed. Things of that nature really point us to looking at this as a completely separate author and a completely separate work that's coming and has been compiled all under the book title of Isaiah. So you guys, if you follow me so far, just tap the screen. I want to make sure I haven't lost anybody dim through this, because as I said, this can be a little dense, but as we go through it, I think you'll start to see it. If you have any questions, of course, send them in as we're going along. I want to make sure that you guys are getting clarity and understanding this and having a working understanding that you can build upon. This isn't going to give you everything. You're not going to be walking out of here with a degree in divinity or anything or a degree in Bible, but this gives you a good foundation upon which you can build up. So yes, 2nd Isaiah picks up at chapter 44 and goes to chapter 55. So 40 to 55. So another thing that's interesting here that we find, of course, is inspiring and uplifting. There are 2 sections within 2nd Isaiah where we see 2 definitive shifts. We see chapter 40 through 48, we deal with the fall of Babylon and what has created a new exodus. Remember, the first exodus is the leaving of Egypt. When the descendants of Joseph went, they stayed in Egypt too long, and they were captive. Pharaoh rose that knew not Joseph, put in slavery. God raised up Moses, led them through the Red Sea, the exodus out of Egypt into the promised land, about going through the wilderness, but y'all understand that already. But now we have another exodus where we are going to be leaving exile and entering back into the promised land. So we've entered the promised land the first time. So God gave Abraham the promised land and said, this is the land I'm giving to you and your descendants. They left, had to return. That's the first exodus, leaving Egypt. Then exile came, then the destruction through the Babylonians. Then they were in exile in Babylon. Second exodus, leaving Babylonian captivity, leaving exile, and entering back into the promised land. So we frame it, the 2nd Isaiah frames this as the second exodus. So that's chapters 40 through 48. Chapter 49 through 55 really start to look at social issues that are arising as a result of being away from Jerusalem. So we see some two definitive shifts within 2nd Isaiah. Another thing that I want to raise, and some of you, I'm sure, would have this question soon. Another thing we see that works itself out in 2nd Isaiah are what scholars call servant poems that are found that begin to start to sketch, that if put together and looked at as a unit, begin to sketch a character that will arise as the characteristics, rather, the character traits of a Savior. So I'm going to give you a couple of references, and I'm going to read the last one to you. So we have 7 of them. Chapter 42, first 6 verses. Chapter 49, the first. So actually, I'll do this. I'm going to read the first one to you. Chapter 42, 1 through 6. I'm going to read part of that. Hear my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out, or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. So that's the beginning in chapter 42. Read on is 1 through 6 if you're taking notes. In chapter 42, verses 1 through 6, the first poem. Second one, we skip over to chapter 49. Also, the first 6 verses, I'm going to read a portion of them for you. Listen to me, you islands. Hear this, you distant nations. Before I was born, the Lord called me. From my birth, he has made mention of my name. So that's 49. Read, if you're taking notes, chapter 49, 1 through 6. Some people who have a New Testament understanding might start seeing some connections here. Chapter 50, verse 4 through 9. Chapter 50, verses 4 through 9. I'm going to read one verse out of here. The sovereign Lord has given me an instructed tongue to know the word that sustains the weary. Chapter 42, and this is the last one. Chapter 42 through chapter 43. And this is where I think everybody might start to hear some language that they've heard before. And I'm going to read for you the beginning of chapter 43. A little further down in chapter 43. Let me turn the page back. Went to the wrong page for you. Okay. He grew up like a tender shoot. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering, like one from whom men hid their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. This is the kicker. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrow. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. So those, what we call servant poems, begin to sketch a character personality, a image, should you say. That was chapter 43. But for that poem, you can read from chapter 42 straight through to 43 to kind of get the whole gist of what's going on there. So now we start to see some of these characteristics that Isaiah is putting together. Because remember, this is 2nd Isaiah, written in, right, you know it, yep, that's chapter 43 that I read. That section was from part of chapter 53 rather. So Isaiah is putting together in exile that he's talking to those who have gone out. They're not in their land, the land that God has given them. And he is being a prophet to them and being prophetic, telling of things to come and describing the Savior that will save them from their exile, from their calamity, to move them from this situation into what God has for them. Now, this is where we really start to have fun, because there are a couple of different thoughts on what Isaiah may have been painting to. Looking just purely in the context of the Old Testament, some say this is Jeremiah, because as you notice in that second one I read to you out of chapter 49, that call story is similar to what we find in Jeremiah chapter 1, where he says, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. We see a similar language in chapter 49. But that's one thought of understanding of who Isaiah may have been pointing to Jeremiah. Another thought that he may have been pointing to the king during exile, Jehoiachin, who was the king of Egypt, of Israel. Remember, as we finished up this book of 2 Kings, we left off going into exile, but it made sure we understood that there was still an heir to the throne of David, an heir in the lineage of David who was alive that was taken into exile. So the Davidic lineage is still alive. So some thought that he was referring to Jehoiachin, because Jehoiachin could then return to the throne and restore the dynasty that is found through King David. But our New Testament understanding, really for us as Christians, frames it in a whole different context. That Isaiah is being prophetic, leading us to the Christ, Jesus Christ. We see, many of you have probably heard that before, not knowing where it came from. But that's coming from something that was written during the exile time, 580 through 538. And somewhere in that time period is when this is written. So we see that the sketch is starting to be made. The foundation is starting to be laid for where we're going to go in the New Testament. And that's why it's so important that as Christians, we don't just have a New Testament understanding of the Bible where we know the Bible front and back starting at Matthew. But we must understand how Jesus fits into the picture, because it shows us just how awesome God is. That God's plan, he's been weaving everything together longer than we could ever imagine. God has been putting the pieces there. He's been giving the clues of what's to come. And God is still doing that even today. So that is 2nd Isaiah. Finally, 3rd Isaiah. We'll roll through this quickly because I said I got 3 more minutes. So I'm going to go through 3rd Isaiah in 3 minutes. Let's see if we can do it. 3rd Isaiah is the Isaiah the Isaiah of the restoration, to those who have gone back. Trito Isaiah, as is often referred to as well. Chapter 56 through 66 is written to those who have returned to Jerusalem, as well as those who did not leave Jerusalem. And so those who stayed in Jerusalem after it was destroyed, and those who went to exile and now have returned to Jerusalem. And they're struggling to rebuild after the destruction. Everything was destroyed. Temple was destroyed. All their livelihood was destroyed. Everything that they had, their government has collapsed, has been destroyed. Everything's destroyed. And they're going back essentially into a war-torn country with rubble, with rocks, with houses that are no more, and having to build it back up. And it's a struggle to rebuild, to get back on their feet. And really, it's an identity struggle. Because remember, the Jews up to this point have had their understanding of who they are since they've been in the promised land by the temple. First the ark and the tent of meeting, then the temple structure that was constructed. Those gave them understanding of who they were in their relationship to God. But all of that's destroyed. And now they have to figure out, how do we understand who we are? So 3rd Isaiah does some things that are very interesting, because it begins, once again, setting a framework for where we're going to progress and evolve to as we get to the New Testament. So now there's no temple, there's no religious structure, there's no hierarchy of priests that are of kings rather, that are on the throne that God has established. There's no divine government, none of that. And 3rd Isaiah has to speak to these people, still instilling hope that God is still with them and that God is still working something out in them. So they have to now understand God in a new way, because this is the first time that en masse they now are in Jerusalem with no temple. In the exile, they are away, so they have to still trust God even while in exile. But now they're back and have no tent of meeting, have no temple. What do we now do? What do we believe? How do we live in right relationship? And how do we know? And this is the kicker. How do we know that God is still guiding us? Because the temple was the physical representation of God's presence. So without that, how do they have confidence that God is still with them? And that's the struggle that they're dealing with. And 3rd Isaiah speaks to that, gives rise and hope to their situation. And I'm going to read as we close. I want to show you the concluding piece to 3rd Isaiah that really helps us and sets us up for where we're going to go when we get to the New Testament. And it really ties a bow on Isaiah. So Isaiah chapter 66, verses 1 through 3. This is what the Lord says. Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where's the house you will build for me? Where will my resting place be? Has not my hand made all these things? And so they came into being, declares the Lord. This is the one I esteem, he who is humble and contrite in spirit, and trembles at my word. So for the first time, God is giving them an understanding that he is not solely, his presence is not solely locked to a structure, but he made everything. And because he made everything, his presence is everywhere. God is omnipresent. So his presence is everywhere. And he's assuring them that his presence is everywhere. And this is the key that I want you to make sure you get as we close it. This is the first time now God, he doesn't say you come to me through you atone, you have sacrifice. He doesn't say you come into my place, you worship me in a certain specific way. This is the key. This is the one I esteem. This is the one I want and I desire. He who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. He's not saying I want the one who comes to temple at a certain time. He's not saying I want the one who worships and does rituals and liturgy in this specific way. I want the one who's willing to give me their heart and live the way I instructed them to. That's what I'm looking for. So as you start to see now, our New Testament theology is really founded and based off of this. Because Jesus comes to, and he says, I haven't come to get rid of it all. I'm the completion of it. I'm showing, and Jesus saying, God has been involving. Your understanding and how you see him has been evolving. Because you started off with just a covenant. Then you had where you needed him to bring you out of something. Then you had the temple, and you had a city, and you had leaders, and you had a throne, and you had prestige and political power. Now you've been in exile. All that's destroyed. God's saying, yes, I'm still here. And what I'm looking for you is your heart. And that's where Jesus picks up in that same vein. And that's why there was so many run-ins, because there's so many who are holding on to the old way, that my understanding of how good of a Jew I am is by whether I sacrifice, whether I observe the laws to a T. Jesus saying, that's great, but the real measure of how much you love God is seen through your heart. And out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And where your heart is, so shall your treasure be. And you will act out of the way your heart is. You will treat others with love if you love yourself. And the love for God, if you love God, and because you love God, you have to love everybody else. You have to love the Good Samaritan. You have to love those who aren't like you. Because if you love God, then you love everybody else. Yes, so the one I read from was 53. So I read 42, a little bit from 42, a little bit from 49, 50, and then 53. So that is the book of Isaiah in a nutshell. And I think I went over by a couple minutes, but the ending just got good because I want y'all, as we go through the prophets, we're starting to connect because the prophets end and then we get to the New Testament. So we need to make sure we're making this connection because the whole point of the Bible basics is to make the bridge. So I'm understanding from Genesis to Revelation. In order to get from Genesis to Revelation, I got to keep stepping. So if you were blessed today, I want you to tap the screen, send up the hearts. I want a mushroom cloud explosion of the hearts. If you're blessed, send in an emoji with the hands up, the clapping hands, the praying hands, thumbs up, whatever your favorite emoji is, send that in. I want to make sure that you guys have been blessed as I share each and every time, but it is true each and every session. Every time I get an opportunity to go back and study in preparation to teach on Periscope in Bible Basics, there is so much more that I see, even after having a degree, even after preaching for years, going through ordination training, all of that. There's so much more that I start to see. Even something as simple as looking at the character sketch and seeing how we're starting to see a framework. Because you hear the prophets foretold that there was a Messiah coming. This is what that foretelling is. So now as we get to the Advent season, and some of you at New Psalmist or at other churches may start to hear preachers preaching out of Old Testament scripture, you'll start to understand where we're going. How are we making this connection? Because it's a prophetic outlook on what's to come. because these are the mouth. These people are speaking in the mouthpiece. They're the mouthpiece of God. And even they did not know the totality of God's plan. And that's important to understand. These are still human vessels that God has chosen to speak through. So the things they're saying, they don't see how this is going to match up with Jesus. They're just following the command that God has given them and saying what God told them to say. And through the expanse of time, God weaves it all together in his own perfect way. Because God, before the foundations of the earth, his whole plan for humanity was already written out. We are just living out the plan that God has already constructed. And God already knows how it's going to end. And one thing we can always have assurance of is that God is always taking care of us. Though we're going through different trials and tribulations, God is just taking us through things so that we can become who it is he called us to be. So next week, we're going to be back at it, looking at the book of Jeremiah, looking at one of the most personal prophets that we'll ever see, that we see in the Bible. I'm excited about that. Don't forget, next Friday, October the 14th, M2 worship at New Psalmist Baptist Church, 7:30 p.m. Hope to see you there. And as always, make sure you're following me on Instagram, Twitter, right here on Periscope at Rev J. Thomas. This session is going to be up on Periscope, and I'm also going to load it on YouTube right along with all the other lessons. So if you missed anything, want to go back and hear any of those scriptures again, looking at anything that we cover, you want to get a refresher on, make sure you check it out. Share it. We want the world to know what's happening and seeing all the great things that we're doing here in Bible Basics. So until next week, y'all, continue to stay blessed. Y'all take care.